The weather the night the Titanic sank was absolutely extraordinary. And unfortunately, it was really the weather that ultimately caused the Titanic disaster. My name's Tim Moulton, and I'm a Titanic historian and author. Titanic sank in the North Atlantic on the 15th of April 1912 in the very early morning. It was one of the calmest nights and clearest nights in history, and that might sound very odd. But what I realized was, if you look at all the reasons why people think the Titanic sank, none of them stacked up. Okay, so what did cause the best ship in the world, given a charge off by the best crew in the world, who were actually keeping a good lookout, who did know there was ice? They were actually trying to get through the ice region before the fog came down. They're actually trying to get through the ice region while it was safe to do so, ironically. So then I thought, well, what really was it that caused it? And then looking at some other ships' logs, I found that other ships in the area around that time, around that part of the North Atlantic, they described mirages and abnormal refraction. And then I thought, hey, maybe this is the missing link here. Maybe this is the key. What's interesting is in 1912, they took air and sea temperature readings every 4 hours. And I was able to build a map of the sea temperatures around where Titanic sank. And it's very clear that Titanic sank in some 15 degrees Celsius Gulf Stream area, where the Labrador Current, which was about -2 degrees Celsius, had actually flowed through that area. And it didn't have very good mixing with the warm water. So this created what we call a thermal inversion, where you have much warmer air above very cold air among the icebergs. And that creates a thing called abnormal refraction, which is a fancy word for light bending differently to what we're used to seeing on the Earth's surface. Everyone knows that light travels in straight lines, but of course it doesn't travel in straight lines in the Earth's atmosphere. It always bends according to the density of the air that it's traveling through. And that night when Titanic sank, because the air was warmer higher up and less dense, and it was much colder and more dense low down, it actually had the effect of bending the light beams down around the curvature of the Earth. So instead of being able to see, say, 20 or even 40 miles from Titanic's crow's nest, they could probably see 80 miles or more. So you might ask, well, what's the problem with that? You know, it's totally clear, one of the clearest nights ever on the North Atlantic. What's the problem with that? And the problem is that they could see through such an enormous depth of air, and the pressure was so high that the molecules themselves in the air actually had the effect of scattering light. And this is called the Rayleigh scattering of light. It's actually what makes the sky blue on a clear day. And it created a very slight band of haze along the horizon. And the problem with that was, although the horizon was way, way far away and the iceberg was much, much nearer when it was seen, the problem is that the band of haze around the horizon was a very similar color to the iceberg. And this had the effect of reducing the apparent angular size of the berg. And in the dark conditions that night, and with the berg coming straight towards the lookouts, it unfortunately meant that the berg had to be that much nearer before it was seen. And it was this abnormal refraction which caught out Titanic's lookouts and crew. In fact, the lookouts weren't believed, because the lookouts said, oh, there was a strange haze on the horizon, but a lot of the officers said it was completely clear. But in fact, of course, both were telling the truth. It was completely clear, and there was a slight haze on the horizon. So not only did the conditions mean that they saw the berg a little bit later than they would normally have, which was the critical difference between just avoiding it and just actually crashing into it, which is of course what happened. It also really ruined the efforts of a nearby rescue ship. So there was a rescue ship called the Californian, only about 10 miles away from where Titanic sank. But through a series of very tragic events, because the air was so clear, and because the horizon appeared to be slightly raised beyond Titanic, instead of her being an 800-foot ship 10 miles away, they judged her to be a 400-foot ship 5 miles away. They then got their Morse lamp signal out to try and Morse to this vessel that they thought didn't have radio. And unfortunately, the layered air in the thermal inversion caused really a sort of scintillation, if you like. And that's why all the passengers noticed the stars were flashing. And of course, for Morse lamp signals going along these layers of air, unfortunately, it scrambled the sense out of the Morse lamp signals. So Titanic was saying, "We are the Titanic sinking, have your boats ready." And Californian was looking at Titanic and assuming that Titanic was burning flickering oil lamps, when in fact Titanic, of course, was a very modern vessel with very solid electric lamps. So these extraordinary atmospheric conditions not only caused the berg to be sighted critically just too late, but they also caused a ship only 10 miles away to fail to come to Titanic's aid. The reason why we're all fascinated by the Titanic today, to a certain extent, is because her story is a kind of modern tragedy. The ancient Greeks and Romans had their great tragedies. And we don't really have that. We do have Titanic. And really the metaphor of Titanic crashing into this massive block of ice on her maiden voyage, that just encapsulates the human condition. The fact that no matter how brilliant and creative humanity is, the world and the universe always has the sort of upper hand, as it were.
I'm Amy Freeze. Welcome to Fox Weather's YouTube page. We have more great videos on the way, so make sure to subscribe to stay updated on all things weather.